Welcome back to Recommended Daily Value. We've got a returning guest, Kathleen Stewart, the woman, the myth, the legend, the former Navy SEAL. Um, she wasn't a Navy SEAL, but she wasn't in the Navy back in the day.
Yeah.
And today we're going to be doing some more regular podcasting. So super excited to have Kathleen back on. And we're just going to kind of chop it up, talk about some topics we've been thinking about, starting with a post we both saw yesterday about Alec Blennis's. So Alec Blennis made a cool post, or in at least a thought-provoking post, that you can out-exercise a bad diet. And the essence of the post was that like a lot of people focus on avoiding bad things rather than kind of, in my opinion, avoiding like bad things like seed oils, quote unquote. Then these are so uniquely toxic for you, rather than doing the things that you need to do in order to be healthy.
Yeah, exactly. And he provides way more nuance in the caption, which I think is always helpful, but hardly anyone reads the caption nowadays, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically what he argues, and I think this is something that we very much agree with, that the more food you take in, especially if the majority of it is whole food, micronutrient dense, you're hitting your fiber requirements, your protein requirements. Obviously, hitting the quote unquote essential fatty acids is like very easy. If you're getting like pretty much any kind of fatty acids intake, your and then it becomes very easy to again hit the micros, which again we've talked about this before, but I think the micronutrients, so the RDAs, the daily values, what we're aiming for, I think that is like the best argument for most of us should probably be eating more than we think we should be, because in order to hit them, as a woman on like 1500 calories a day, you have to be like so very precise with like the food choices and the gram amounts and all that stuff. And why is this important? Well, the RDAs are meant to make sure that we don't, encounter like a frank deficiency, right? Like not even just like a subclinical nutritional deficiency, but like a frank deficiency. So, obviously there's a standard deviation. So there's, a little bit there, but that's to allow for the population, divergences and stuff in the mean. So yeah, so I think that's like the best argument. But then obviously it becomes very easy to hit the micronutrients the more food that you intake. And then from there, it's like, okay, I've hit my macros. I have to eat all this food. Like I know we encounter this because of how many calories we eat. And so it's like we do kind of just fill in with quote unquote more empty calories. But at
Yeah.
the start, like especially with the people in Transform, like we really focus in on the micronutrient dense foods to make sure you're hitting those RDAs, etc. Because most people just aren't. And so it's until we've accounted for these things, we want to kind of leave these, you know, um, low satiety, low volume, like hyper palatable foods to the side. But then once we have accounted for these things, it's like, okay, well, it makes more sense to add in some of these things, assuming that we're
Yeah.
not like blowing the macros and stuff for sure.
And that's where a lot of people run into issues, right? They're eating a lot of these low satiety, highly palatable foods that typically are very low in micronutrients. It's like essentially junk food, and then they're also not balancing that with satiety. So they might be eating too many calories, at least at some points, but they're eating too many calories of the wrong foods. So like their whole structure is wrong. The whole pyramid is crumbling because they have too much energy relative to their micronutrient intake, and they're probably just eating a surplus entirely. So they're just eating too much, and then they're also eating probably a bunch of toxic, sludge and things that Alec Blennis probably kind of disagreed with in the post, where it's like, okay, yes, it's not great to eat red 40 and ton of PUFAs and all that stuff, but like also you need to be eating enough of the right foods and things like that. And it's kind of one of the concepts we've been talking about with Transform, with like the micronutrients. It's like the more food, essentially what you just said, the more food you have, the more you can lean on quote unquote junk food or less nutrient dense calories. But when you are pretty low in calories, you need to focus on whole foods pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I eat approximately 500 grams of carbs a day. Like for me to get all of those carbs from like fruit and stuff, like I just don't feel good. I would be a mess. Like digestion's a mess. And that's not saying that fruit is bad or I don't like fruit. Of course, I love fruit, but it's like balancing it that I can get in that food and still feel good and like training my workouts, training the fact that I'm a mom and up at random times with my sons and stuff like that, and obviously chasing after them and playing with them and stuff. So yeah, it's about you know um, focusing on what we need and then versus I think a lot of people focus on removing instead of adding in more of what we need. And then by nature, those things kind of push everything else out because something that we notice working with, many people now is that the more you do focus on what you need, you get the micronutrients in, you kind of dial in, the macronutrients, etc. People start to feel better. The food noise drastically decreases, cravings and this kind of like undereat, overeat cycle drastically decreases. Um, and from there, you don't really want some of these, more nutrient devoid foods. Or if you do, it's more of a rare event. And so because it's more of a rare event, it doesn't really impact you as much, especially with like adaptive thermogenesis, like the 1 day adaptive thermogenesis that will kick in and stuff. So it doesn't really quote unquote negatively impact you from like a body composition standpoint versus I have to remove all of these things. I can't eat these things. And then you're like super like hyper food focused because I can't eat this thing. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so it's more about like doing more of the things that make you feel better over time. U-shaped curve, obviously, because like people will be like, "Oh, well, Kathleen, you're eating 3,000 calories a day. Like, why would you not have that as like whole food micronutrient dense because like don't you need more of those micronutrients to like take care of that?" And I would love to hear your view on this, Tyler, but myself personally, so anecdotal, and then also working with people, I've never found that people need to vastly go over the RDAs in order to use those macronutrients. So like as a woman, like I don't feel like I have to way overshoot the RDAs, proportionally to the amount of calories that I'm taking in. So, like, if you say, okay, the RDAs for a woman are set at like 2,500 calories, and so you might need to increase proportionally. I haven't found that. And even we've talked about this before, but even like with the MTHFR and the vitamin B2 issue, like, you're still in the same order of B2. It's just like 2 or 3 times the amount. So it's really not that much more than the RDA. It's just like kind of a little bit more. So yeah, I would love to hear if you have any thoughts on that, if you've experienced anything like that.
I think it's tough because once you start hitting the RDAs, it's kind of like most people are not even close to that. And so once you start hitting it with clients, they're like, "Oh my god, I start feeling so much better."
Yeah.
Because like they were at ground zero. Now that like they fill in a couple micronutrients, and all of a sudden you get your folate, whatever it is your copper, vitamin E, and all of a sudden a lot of things start running more smoothly. And then I think it kind of comes down more so to like what foods do you do well with. I have not had like I think part of the reason I'm so hungry is because I do rely somewhat on more sugary food. Not that I have an issue with hunger, but like I'm just in a good place of hunger, I would say,
Yeah.
where I'm ready for my next meal.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Exactly. Yeah. You're
yeah,
not forcing the meals.
no, but it's because I like rely on like a lot of sugars and like lemonade and orange juice and maple syrup, which are essentially, other than maybe orange juice, like nutrient void foods. But I think a lot of times people get so much like there are certain foods that you add in with, right? Like, and if you quantify or you correlate a food with a micronutrient. So, for example, I'm thinking about it right now as you brought it up. I should probably add some more spinach to get some more fiber. And I think that I also had some improvements in digestion. And who's to say, is that because of the fiber? Is it because of the folate in the spinach? Is it because of this? So I think this is an argument against kind of our approach a little bit. Like without supplementation, it's hard to pinpoint a specific micronutrient sometimes
Yeah.
because unless you add in a food like camel milk where you're like, okay, I'm pretty sure it's the B1 because it's
Yeah.
just so dense and it's in B1, which it's almost like a supplement at that point, right?
Yeah. 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 But at the same time, you could still make the argument of like maybe there's some, I don't know, unique peptide or something in the camel milk that's like really
Yeah.
causing it. But yeah, I agree. That is one like well, I definitely learned a whole lot about myself when I did the drop dosing with and I individually built the bees because I basically figured out like, okay, these symptoms apply to this, B vitamin. But most people don't want to spend the time doing that. And I use such low doses too because I couldn't handle higher doses. But again, most people just don't want to spend the time doing that. And so it becomes difficult. So either people will just take like a super physiologic dose of a B complex or just take like a multivitamin or something, which obviously we've gone on and on about that. But yeah, I agree. It can be helpful to go the individual routes to figure out, what correlates to what. And then from there, you always like, I always know, certain, one of my symptoms, like that I'm becoming B1 deficient is I, uh, my oxygen saturation drops as I'm, like, trying to fall asleep, and then I also have this, like, weird swallow type thing where I, like, almost build up saliva in the back of my throat, and then I, like, almost choke on it, essentially. And then I have, like, I have unique symptoms to B3 and B5 and, all that stuff, but I had to figure that out for myself, and again, it took a lot of time to figure that out, and a lot of people just don't wanna do that. So it's like, that's why I love the approach of, "Okay, well, let's just hit the theoretical RDAs because again, tracking is all theoretical. There is always error, but it's like the amount of error is less than just kind of, shooting in the dark and doing nothing. And so, and over time, the more you do it, that error helps to wash out and stuff. So, but I really
Yeah.
fast about the RDAs. Like a lot of people always shoot back and say, "Oh, it's impossible to be overweight and to be in an LEA." And I think the RDAs alone is a great argument as to why that is not true. Because just because you have stored body fat on you or you're technically eating enough, that doesn't actually mean that you're effectively using that food to not only make ATP, but for enzymes, because obviously we need, you know, um, a significant amount of protein to actually make enzymes. Like, obviously, there's been a big push in the kind of alternative sphere, or even just like the movement sphere of like, okay, we need enough protein to put on muscle mass, but it's like amino acids aren't only just, helping us put on muscle. It's obvious we obviously are mostly using amino acids for things like the enzymes and stuff. Um, and so, yeah, so that's why like I will always push back and say that you can definitely be in an LEA or yeah, definitely in an LEA and still be overweight because of these other factors that are important to metabolism.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so easy to be under in protein, so easy to be under in most of your micronutrients or a lot of micronutrients. Like, I think you sent me a video, someone sent me a video where it's just like 3,000 calories in donuts.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's like 4 or 5 donuts, and you'd probably hit, I don't know what you'd hit your RDA in. Maybe if it's fortified grains, you'd hit it in like iron and iodine or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's tough.
Yeah, and that's something that in Transform we recommend that people move away from using fortified foods as contributing to their theoretical RDAs. Like so, basically, don't count the fortified bread, etc., the micronutrients from that into your into like your chronometer RDAs. And it's always funny to me too because like you always hear and obviously we've talked about this and in many ways there is some truth to this idea but like doctors will say like oh don't take a multivitamin it just creates like expensive urine and stuff but then you like look at any like cereal box for example and it's literally like a multivitamin in a box like you look at Cheerios and the amount of food fortification that's in the Cheerios and I'm not saying like don't necessarily eat the Cheerios, especially if you objectively do well with them, especially again if it's one of the foods that you're using to like fuel your runs and stuff like that, because you've already accounted for all these other things and it doesn't cause digestive problems or brain fog, all of those things. Um, but it's like this is literally just a multivitamin in a box. And so yeah, it doesn't square, not consistent.
Yeah. The other thing which you kind of mentioned about this Alec Blennis's post, I just think it's so interesting to ponder it how attractive it is to avoid bad things versus like optimize for fiber, look at the micronutrients. And I do wonder if I wonder why sometimes.
Yeah,
Like 'cause
like
it's so easy to make a huge spiel over red 40
yeah.
or seed oils, but it's like, okay, well, arguably equally as important, are you hitting your vitamin E
Right.
RDA? And most people that are like avoiding seed oils are probably not hitting their vitamin E RDA.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, especially if they're not having like broccoli because they've obviously, said no to the seeds and the nuts and stuff. So those sources are out and then it's like most people have kind of demonized broccoli because of, you know, thyroid argument, mechanistic arguments about the thyroid, but yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think we talked about this before where it's like you're looking at the very top of the pyramid instead of like focusing on the actual big movers and stuff. And I also just go back to too like back to the idea of supplementation and we've talked about this before but there is something about the food matrix and the way that all of these things are integrating together integrating your digestive system whether it is some type of to give a nod to the quote unquote quantum biology guru people, which I wish they would first of all stop calling themselves quantum biology because it's really more they're like E&M biology gurus because they literally just talk about electricity and magnetism, but then they claim it's quantum mechanics. But anyways, little mini rant aside. But maybe there is some kind of like information transfer, right? Based off of like the food matrix and like what's going on, how it's interacting with the enterocytes, even your stomach cells, like parietal cells and stuff like that, right? Um, and so there's something, important, I think, to food that supplementation just doesn't provide. Um, so that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that we think that you can only eat in season food because we talked about this too, but the length at which people have gone to preserve food throughout all of human history and to like trade with each other from all around the world is just like, you know,
Yeah.
it's been a huge focus, right? So,
Yeah. Ray talked about that a lot, like where there's just so many compounds in food that we just don't even know of. And Morley Robbins, I
what
think he had like the concept of the whole food vitamin C, which I think was completely disproven. But it is somewhat true, right? There is that whole food matrix of like all these different things that come with the food. And I think Jeff Nippard made a post that he's going to change to like 3D printed. I had a joke about 3D printed, but 3D printed ground beef. Like when there's, I guess like machine made ground beef. Maybe it wasn't Jeff Nippard. I saw someone talk about it,
huh.
and then people were like, well, "Look, just because you can manufacture the protein chemically doesn't mean it's exactly the same." And I was like, "Yeah, there's so much that goes the structured water. There's so many things that
Right.
we just can't handle." And I've thought about a lot recently. My grandma had her knee replaced, and she can't even bend her knee fully. So if we can't fully replicate a bone yet, how do we think we can replicate? Like a bone is like a, I mean, it's not, but it's a somewhat simple physical structure that we can completely see. How can we think we can replicate the hundreds of thousands of chemical compounds that we haven't even recognized that are in food?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then not only like isolating them individually, but then how do, the first order, second order effects of them actually interacting with each other and then interacting with us and stuff. Yeah, that's why like people, they'll say, "Oh, but there's so much error when it comes to eating." And it's like, yeah, of course there's error everywhere, but again, that's kind of why, the kind of more consistent you are over time, a lot of these error things wash out and you just start to feel better anyway, so it doesn't really matter, right? Like
Yeah.
the talking about the knee replacements, man, those surgeries are like so epically crazy how the surgeons are literally in there with like sledgehammers and stuff.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, it's, I'll have to send you a video. I think it's a knee replacement. It might have been a hip replacement, but, like, they have this, like, massive thing that they're using to, like, to provide torque to, like, open up something, and then the other guy is, like, in there, like, swinging away.
That's crazy. I mean, I guess that makes sense, especially a hip. Those things are in there so tight.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's a gnarly image to think about.
Yeah, that's why I'm trying to avoid that. That's why I've never had surgery on my shoulder, to be honest, because I'm, like, trying to avoid all those things, but the I still definitely have, like, frozen shoulder issues, especially like end range horizontal abduction and flexion. And you see what they do for frozen shoulder with surgery wise. They basically put you under, and then they basically just like take your arm at like a 90-degree angle, and you just like, and you just see
Snap
like
it.
this capsule like snap and all that stuff. Like, oh, that does not look good. It looks very painful, especially afterwards. It's like I'll take my limited range of motion. Yeah.
My friend tore his, what did he tear? He tore something in his arm. I don't think it was his bicep, but they have tried. He can't hasn't been able to straighten his arm for
Oh,
almost a decade at this point. And they tried to tear out the scar tissue because that's what prevents him from straightening it.
yeah.
And they put him under, took all the scar tissue out, bent his arm straight. As soon as he woke up, it snapped right back.
Uh,
Like, and he's like, yeah, like I need to go get surgery on it again, but like I'm never doing that again because it was
yeah.
so painful.
That's almost when I wonder, like, is it more neurological? Um,
He dislocated his elbow. Sorry, yeah, that's what he did.
okay. Yeah,
Um, yeah, I would think so at that point, right? If he just all of a sudden becomes conscious and it snaps back.
that's why I think, like, a lot of mine is probably more neurological at this point, that, like, I've just held it in a certain position for so long that it's just going to take so much time. Because 'cause I've tried all the things, right? And, like, technically with a frozen shoulder, it's supposed to fully thaw within about 2 to 3 years, and it definitely thawed, but
Wait, what do you mean? What they use the word thawed?
yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah, so there's okay, so the trajectory of frozen shoulder, there's the freezing, the frozen, and then the thawing. So there's the three phases of it. Um, and usually the freezing is like when it's like the most painful. The frozen, it still can be pretty painful, but you just like literally can't move it. Like I could like I barely could move it when I was frozen. So it's way more improved now. And then the thawing, that's when it obviously like releases. Um, but then from there, you're supposed to be able to go back, to full kind of range of motion. But I always wonder about the neuro side because usually when it comes to frozen shoulder, and I'm so thankful I have not experienced this, but it will usually jump sides. And so like say you had it on the left, eventually will go to the right. Um, so yeah, so I always wondered about the like neuro component too. But what you said about your friend, that immediately like, okay, there's something about consciousness. It's important.
Yeah.
We should talk to Kath, one of the ladies in Transform. She does all of the like putting people under and stuff like that for surgery. And like yeah, it'd be so that entire thing is just so interesting to me where you put someone under like anesthesia and you're just like
Yeah.
there but like not there. Like where do you go?
Yeah.
And, like, the question of, like, okay, we'll get a little bit, out there for a second, but, like, where are you? Like, if you sit here
Consciously.
yeah, like, if you sit here and say, like, "Okay, where am I?" Like, am I behind my eyes? But, like, how far behind my eyes am I? Or, like, am I in my heart? Like, I think some of these things are very interesting to think about. Obviously, they don't really bear much on the day to day, but it's
Mm.
always an interesting question.
Who is that famous philosopher that like came up? I think therefore I am.
Oh,
Like,
oh.
which gets like paraphrased to be like I haven't read it in a very long time. Him, but it's like a really deep argument that like essentially the only way I can prove that I exist is because I think right now. Oh, and because I have these thoughts, I must exist. Like it's like a backwards like mathematical proof, and I was like, wow, this is so much deeper than I thought it
Descartes.
was.
Descartes.
Descartes,
Yeah.
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 He didn't love a lot of his. I don't know. I'm not that familiar with him, but no, I'm thinking of whom I think. I was thinking of Kant, so I don't know
Oh,
too much
Kant.
about Descartes.
Okay.
But those he's Greek philosopher, right?
No,
Or is he
Descartes is
French?
yeah, he's later than Greek.
He's got to be like French.
1637.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Yes, I do actually do remember. Yes, the
right.
French. Yeah, Descartes is definitely French.
Yeah.
And yeah, that is.
We're getting
And like,
out
I
there.
mean, what? Yeah, what do you think about the theory that essentially it's like you're interrupting like the cellular coherence, like the energy waves, and that's what's creating like the loss of consciousness during.
Yeah. Um it would have to be more local. But then we also know that like consciousness isn't only the brain too. And so cuz like if you're interrupting the coherence, like why doesn't the heart stop, for example? Or like why do you not, um so that's why
Yeah,
I don't think it's only that. I think there's maybe something else going on, but I also definitely don't think that like we're just in here. Like I definitely think that like what Dr. Pete would talk about, how like we are constantly interacting with the environment, and oh, who is it? The like bioresonance field. What's his name? He's a
oh,
British
Joe
guy.
Dispenza.
No. Scientist. He's a British guy. Uh,
Oh, the electric guy.
I'll have to look it up.
Um,
We can keep talking. But anyways, we can put it in the show notes or something. I always forget people's names all the time. I remember like
yeah,
things, but I always forget people's names. I'm
yeah,
really good with remembering people's faces and like um parts of their story and stuff like that,
yeah.
but I can never remember their name.
You're not referring to the body electric though, right? Is
No,
that
no,
is
no.
that the book?
Not Gerald, not Pollock
Robert Becker.
or
Oh,
Becker. Yeah, not any of those guys.
I still need to read that book.
Yeah, it's
But
pretty
okay.
good.
Um, but I did want to go back to this Alec Blennis post still. So what I think is really interesting to consider again, because so many people do hype on these, the Red 40, and it's always funny when one of my friends confront me, like for like, oh, like there's artificial sweeteners and that. Like occasionally, the very few occasions where I drink something that's not like whatever perfect. Red Bull is still PD, by the way. I'm calling it. I'm still. I'll die on that hill. But I don't really drink Red Bull that much either, unless I'm on the mountain. But that being said, like if you are doing like I was thinking about a stereotypical friend of mine that's like, okay, he's kind of nailing all the boxes, but let's pretend he is nailing all the boxes. Like he exercises, got a good amount of muscle mass, hitting his RDAs, hitting his calories. In terms of longevity, like how confidently can we say that avoiding, let's say, the quote unquote toxic nutrients is going to have a significant impact, and what is significant impact on his longevity?
Yeah. And well, with that, even if you are consuming something that may not be that great for you, the fact that you are accounting for all these other things is allowing your liver, your digestive system, et cetera, to handle it, to be okay. Like, everyone that's like, oh, you should fast for like a liver, sorry, for a liver cleanse. And it's like, no, the liver needs a lot for sulfation and glucuronidation and, taurination, all these things. So like it makes no sense to not give it those, macros and micros that it needs to do those things. And then I agree because it's also like, the social factor of that. It's like, okay, well, maybe the stress of not consuming those things, again, we're not talking about those are the only things you consume. Like you said, given this situation where all these other things are accounted for, like, okay, you know, I've personally found anecdotally again that these things don't impact me as much anymore. I'm more robust. I can handle them. If anything, not all like junk food and stuff, obviously, but like certain things like are really good tools again to get the calories in and I feel good eating them. So even though they may not be like quote unquote optimal, but I also think that, we mitigate a lot of these things with like some of our targets, right? The fact that we first recommend like hitting the RDAs, well that kind of helps to push a lot of things out because again, if you're only eating 2000 calories, well most of that 2000 calories is going to have to be from micronutrient dense foods, so that doesn't leave much room for some
Yeah,
other things. um, it also kind of forces you to do more of the baking. And so in that case, hopefully are using slightly higher quality things like flour and stuff that's not fortified. And yeah, you know, good sources of butter and, cream and milk and all that stuff. So that helps there. And then by the way, it was Rupert Sheldrake. That's who I was talking about when it comes to
oh, I've heard of
micronutrient
him.
supplements. Yeah.
Okay, is he the guy that looked at, like, was it dead people or like dead mice?
I don't think
Rupert
so.
Sheldrake. Okay, but yeah,
He's
and
a
and so like going,
biochemist.
okay, biochemist, why do I know him? um but going along with that, it's just, to me, it's like people are, in my opinion, and I think you would agree, are choosing the wrong hill to die on.
Yeah.
And I'm not advocating that you go eat any of these like red 40, these like PUFAs, all this stuff of, but especially like, I don't know, maybe if you're in that dose, in that range where you have all your buckets, your ducks in a row for Ash and Sarah, and then you can have some like Cheetos or whatever, some fried food every once in a while, and like you'll be fine. But I do wonder, like, what is the, which we can't calculate, what is the impact of if you're perfect versus your 5% error every once in, like, every few weeks you have, or like you have a vacation where you kind of go off the walls a little bit, still maintaining within some bounds, but you don't really care and you're a lot less stressed. Like, I do wonder if it is even going to be measurable.
Yeah, people always will throw out percentages, but usually they're looking at the relative percentage versus the actual percentage. And it's like the relative percentage may look really significant, like 90% or something like that. But it's like if you look at the actual, it's like 1%. So it's like doesn't matter. It's like we go from 1% to 2%. Well, relatively, what that's, a fairly large increase, right? But it's like it doesn't matter because it's only going from 1% to 2% actually. Um,
Yeah,
yeah. So I agree completely. And again, especially if, the thing that we kind of always go back to is like if you eat these foods and you objectively have no issue with them, if anything, they make you feel good. And not from like a hedonistic, like, oh yeah, I really love this food type thing, but from like an actual, like, yeah, I get energy from this. I, feel
I feel
warm.
good after,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah, I don't have digestive issues, again, no brain fog, sometimes, like, the foods, sometimes they, like, will help put you in a parasympathetic state, and so it's like, "Okay, I can finally relax and rest," and stuff like that, and a lot of people need that, and I think a lot of people have always associated that with hyperglycemia, and it's like, not necessarily, like, just because you feel tired after a meal, that doesn't mean that, you have high blood glucose, like, obviously if it like keeps happening and stuff like and you have other signs like okay maybe it's worth tracking and like testing your blood glucose and insulin and seeing where those things are at, but it could also just be that you had a really good combination of food and it's put you in a parasympathetic rest and digest state and you're just like ready to rest, especially if you've been like kind of burning the candle at both ends for a while, and you finally are like, oh, I can finally relax and stuff. So, um, yeah, I think also what I was going to say too is the our like fat target of the zero point 0.8 grams of fat per kilogram. Like that I think really helps too because a lot of a significant part of the fat is coming from the protein sources, unless you're just having like shrimp and non-fat Greek yogurt and stuff. But like still, for most people that we work with, like I would say a significant part of that fat's coming from protein sources. And so that doesn't leave a lot of fat grams left over for like things like chips and stuff like that. However, it does leave like maybe a little bit. So it's like, okay, maybe you have the actual serving size of the chips, so the 11 chips or whatever it is. And you get that crunch, you get the saltiness, you get the enjoyment factor, the nostalgia, like all these other things that do play a role, but we want them to play like a conscious role, right? Um, without again, like jacking your PUFA consumption up so much that it then causes like all these downstream effects and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, again, I think a lot of the targets really help to allow for progression of health and resolution of health and like putting on muscle and all this other, all these other things, but at the same time, still allowing you, you know, to live. And I also think that we should become more robust over time too, because like we should be able to, when we're at home and stuff and we're controlling things a little bit more, that should be like moving our needle forward so that when it comes time to like, okay, we're on vacation or we're wherever, we can like go out and have like the quote unquote less than optimal food. Um, but we're so much more robust that it doesn't even phase us. If anything, it's
Yeah.
like a positive because of the fact that we're on vacation or we're with friends, deep, meaningful relationships, like all of these things. Again, it goes back to the slice of the pie, like the quote unquote quantum or relabel them E&M gurus. They all think that like because they've self-selected into sunlight and cold baths and all this stuff, like because that was a big needle mover for them. Where like the German New Medicine people, like they self-selected to like more the psychological piece was like a big mover for them. Um, and the people that weren't doing any kind of movement, that it's like, oh, everyone needs to move now and everyone needs to put on muscle and all that stuff. Like they self-selected for those things. And so that's why like people will shout from the rooftop like this is the thing, and it's like no, there's the entire pie, and you kind of have to figure out what slice you need more of, add more of that, and then hopefully that's helps to crowd out some of the other things that are not necessarily serving you. So
Yeah. Yeah. This brings up. So I didn't really get into Twitter debate, but I commented on this guy's Twitter, and his name, guy who posted originally, I think is Dan Go.
Dango, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And he said, what are the standards you should have for fitness? And I said it, I thought it was a pretty decent answer, like 15 push-ups for women, 25 for guys. I think like 3 and 5 pull-ups respectively, under a 10-minute mile, and then able to sprint. And I think if you can do those things, like not fast, just like able to actually get up to full speed. And I think that's like a pretty good standard. Like you have some strength, some reaction, some like endurance, probably pretty good. And then I saw someone comment, and which this inspired my post yesterday, which I know you saw. How it was like you can't really like define fitness. It's just like repetitive actions that make you stiff, and this isn't fitness. And I'm just like, dude, I'm gonna blow. I'm gonna explode.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, okay, what I literally commented, all right, then define a test that like you can actually measure this with. Because it's
Yeah.
the whole functional fitness thing that like lifting isn't functional. And the essence of my post yesterday was like, look, if you only lift weights, which the consequence of is gaining mass for the most part, there are some like movement complications where like as you get really strong, you might lose the ability to you might lose the ability to rotate in some things. But if you're not gaining that much weight, which could be fat or muscle mass, and you're still doing the sports you want, still including some rotation, you probably are not going to see a lot of maladaptations from lifting weights, especially in a short term. Maybe if you do it for like 20, 30 years, you might get stiffer over time, but like very little maladaptation. But there's a lot of people that just purely do not have the connective tissue necessary to support do not have the muscle mass necessary to support their connective tissue. So for a lot of people, like the women in Transform, or some of them, they become a lot more functional, mobile, less in pain as a result of training. And if that's not functional, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I think conversation you had with Pat Davidson, Dr. Pat Davidson, was really great
Yeah.
because people have basically with like older individuals, people trainers have like tried to work on more of the velocity, the like reaction time, etc. piece, and like yes, maybe it helps a little bit with like proprioception and stuff, but I think the vast majority of the industry, like obviously there's still people that are trying to innovate and trying to come up with ways to like, impact this side a little bit more. But I think the vast majority of the industry has just realized that like the amount of gains you get from that is so little compared to the amount of gains that you can get from building muscle, which again is still pretty little, and just like getting stronger in general and stuff. Um, that it's almost better to put the time at focus on building muscle, getting stronger, and then maybe having, like what Dr. Pat Davidson was talking about, like the degrees of ground and stuff like that. And so, like for the general population, like most of their training being the most like grounded, and then maybe you sprinkle in some, slightly less grounded things to impact these things. But those things like being, you know, not a significant portion of the training, but older individuals and also younger individuals too, because I definitely had like my own proprioceptive, et cetera, issues when I was like deep in the LEA, focusing on that muscle building, the strength building, even though it's slow, but it's not as slow or it doesn't seem to be as slow as the reactionary things. Um, you seem to get more gains from that doing those things versus focusing on like this nebulous fascia or even like connective tissue training or whatever, especially when when it comes to connective tissue. It seems like most of our connective tissue we develop as children, and then from then on you're basically just trying to maintain it for the rest of your life, and like maybe you can get slightly more gains, but it's more so about maintaining what you had as a child. So this is like reason to let your children jump off the things, which I
Yeah.
understand can be a little bit harrowing sometimes, but it's like, graded exposure, right? Like with anything, even with children, it's like graded exposure, like, build them up to it, of course, but especially if they've been doing nothing and just like sitting down and playing video games and stuff. But yeah, and then back to like the original thing about how you can't define these things. I think that's just like relativism creep, where people will say, oh, there's like the word concept fallacy, where like people will say a word, but that doesn't necessarily mean they mean the same concept that you do. And so like, it's always coming back to like you need to actually define what you mean, because what you're saying may not necessarily be exactly what I'm saying. And so we're like ships passing in the dark. We're completely missing each other here. Or like it seems like you're saying the same thing, but you're like not, because of how they define something versus how you define something. Or then you even have like the extreme where people are like, words have no meaning. So because words have no meaning, you can't define anything. Um, yeah, so I just see that all over the place. But it's like, sure, at that point, we might as well just not do anything, but then that doesn't push the needle forward at all, and like you said, with so many of the women and men in Transformed, it's like we see huge, huge positives by just getting them to focus more on, steps, some zone 2, some high intensity work, and then, of course, lifting, 2 to 3 days per week, and yes, like, building muscle is a slow process, but you might as well do it because you're not going anywhere. And it's like one of the best things you can do to help make sure you don't get something like a fall, or even if you do fall, you have the muscle mass there that to almost like provide a cushion. People will say, well, why not just have fat mass to provide the cushion? But I think the muscle mass is great because it, like you said, it gives structure to the connective tissue. And so it allows the force transfer through the connective tissue into the muscle and then back, back through again. Like how, you look at the Achilles tendon and it's like a spiral, right? Spiral up into
Yeah.
the calves and stuff. So yeah. Anyways.
But also
Oh,
you need enough. Go ahead.
sorry, one last thought. The idea of like you become stiff, the amount of weight that most of the general population is lifting, I just don't think is sufficient enough to like make them like power lifter stiff, right? It's
Great,
like
great
sure,
point.
maybe the power lifters because they're lifting in the elite level of strength standards. Like sure, maybe they're becoming stiff. Maybe over time, to maintain like joint health and stuff, they need a little bit more of those zero ground or like very little ground movements and stuff. But like for most of the general population, like they're in like maybe beginner strength levels. And so it's like we kind of want to get them up to into the intermediate, if not, like the high end of the intermediate, for them to actually look like they have muscle and for them to actually look like how they want to look, how they imagine themselves to look like, basically not skinny fat essentially. And this is why we always tell people in Transform that it's like your what you envision your goal weight to be is probably lower than what it should be because you have this big runway to put on muscle mass. And I don't think people realize that. So it's like, sure, maybe you have 20 pounds of fat mass to lose, but you also have like potentially 20 pounds of muscle to lose. So like the scale might show the same weight at the end, but what matters is that your body composition and how you look and stuff. So
Yeah. Couple thoughts there. One, like people just don't understand that you need regarding like the fat mass being the cushion. Well, it's like you need the muscle mass to create enough force so that you can actually pull on your tendons and bones and then maintain and create adaptations there for, stronger tendons, greater bone density. So if you can't, like with the sprinting, with a lot of the women in Transform, a lot of them, at least at the start, are probably just not creating enough force to actually create the adaptations that we want because they haven't sprinted in so long. And a lot of the women, I'd say about half the women in Transform typically are like get really good results in the first phase, restore phase, because they just weren't doing anything previously. So all of a sudden, all these things start clicking, and then the other women are like, "Why aren't I seeing this stuff?" It's like because you were kind of doing all the good things before, so it's going to be a lot slower rather than having this like light bulb flash. All of a sudden, you just get this dramatic transformation, and then that's when like the cut and they see a lot more changes and their muscle mass kind of come to fruition. But yeah, I think it's and the adaptation that the powerlifters are looking for is like they might need to be stiff in order to
right.
have their function. So that argument just drives me absolutely bonkers because it's just like you just these meaningless word soup.
Did you guys ever come to a resolution or was it just constant like talking around the point?
Oh, I just told him like then come up with a test and he didn't respond because there's no test. Like what like functional is A relative, but B it's like a bogus term.
Well, and
And
I think that's what Dr. Pat Davison like made very clear in the discussion you guys had that it like, when it comes to athlete, like defining what is athletic or an athlete, it really comes down to like, well, what do you need it for? Like, are you playing table tennis or are you powerlifting? Or are you figure
yeah,
skating? Like, so the kind of, I think we could make like a more broad a definition when it comes to like the general population, but then when it comes to an actual athlete, someone that's actually like doing something, that's when it becomes a little bit more specific based off of like what they actually need to do.
yeah. Yeah, I have my own definition, but I do think Pat Davidson's definition is also valid, where it's just like it's relative to the sport. I have my definition of what I think like an athlete, like the most athletic person would be, which is like, something like a running back typically that can like very shifty but strong, forceful. And obviously like everyone is going to have different pinnacles of their athleticism, but my friend ran the Leadville 100 and you saw like he was 22nd or just Truett Haynes ran it too. He was 22nd. He ran it in 22 hours.
Wow.
The first place ran it in 15,
Oh my goodness.
which is just insane. But like, to me, it's like, okay, you are obviously in insane shape, but like he's probably not. I doubt he's throwing a great spiral on a football. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like he's probably you don't have to be. I mean, for Leadville 100, I could be wrong here because you probably have to be pretty coordinated. But like to me, athleticism is just a combination of all these traits, like coordination, conditioning, strength, power, uh, tendon elasticity, all of these things. But you could also just define it as, well, he was the most athletic that day, right? And he won the Leadville 100, which I think is also a fair definition.
Yeah. I think to push back on you a little bit, the you probably say that about the running back because you have some intrinsic value when it comes to football or like nostalgia when it comes to football. So to you, football means something where like if you were to take, I don't know, someone from a different part of the world that like really values like cricket, for example, they would
Yeah.
say like no, they would say running backs are not peak athleticism. Like these cricket players are peak, so I think a lot of that always comes in. But yeah, I do wonder like is there like an objective standard. That's why I could see like creating more of an objective standard when it comes to like the general population, where it's like, okay, this is more just about like, general health, being able to move, all of those things. Where when it comes to like more of a specific sport, I guess it's a little bit more difficult to identify because you just always self-identify with like, well, I love this sport. So, you know,
Yeah.
like like uh um like Austin Einhorn, he talks about like the adaptation that happens when you basically become like aquatic like, and so land animals we like can move all of our joints and stuff. Where like aquatic like you stop moving the individual joints and you kind of more just like a fin basically. And so like with swimmers would be like, no, but we want to become aquatic like because we want to go fast in the pool and stuff like that. Like I don't want my feet and knees and stuff to bend because I just want my legs to bend, function so that I can kick. And same thing kind of with arms and stuff. Obviously there's some bend and stuff there, but yeah, so I think it always just depends on like the lens you're looking
Yeah,
for. Someone
I,
would then say
I
I'm
agree.
being relativistic right now. I acknowledge the
No, we definitely are. I would just say like my friend and I had this like debate. We had an in depth conversation. I was like, okay, to me, a sprinter more athletic than a marathon runner.
yeah. But
And so it's like, okay,
the marathon runner would say I'm more athletic than the sprinter. That
yeah, absolutely. But like okay, that's like saying like I'm more beautiful than
yeah,
you. It's like, well, that's kind of depends on like who you ask, right? So I feel like there has to be like some kind of objective definition where to me like pure athleticism at its pinnacle is like a amalgamation of a bunch of traits.
yeah,
Because if you're only in really good shape, like if you can run the world's fastest marathon, but you can only do it on a treadmill, I'm like, okay, well, like, are you really that athletic?
yeah,
Like if there's a single divot in the road, you might die
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like, because you're not used to it. Um, and then like, obviously this is my definition, but like, okay, can you like throw a ball? Can
Yeah,
you like juke? Like, can you shift your body pretty well? And
yeah,
I wouldn't define like powerlifters as the pinnacle of athleticism
right.
too, because I would say that's purely strength. Or, and sorry, one last thing is like, I don't think we kind of came to the conclusion that a lot of competitions aren't sports. Like
Yeah,
snowboarding, I think is more of a competition than a
that's
sport
true.
because at some point it's really mostly skill based, right? Because like playing guitar, absolutely not a sport. Everyone agrees. Snowboarding is like very, very skill focused, just less. And I do think having coordination skill is a component, but it's not the only thing in my definition of athleticism.
Yeah. I think with like true athleticism, you'd have to almost look at like every major or even like minor joint in the body and then like create a task to test each one of those things. And then because like obviously CrossFit like kind of tried to do this, but they're just like so sagittal dominant that they never
Yeah.
get like really on the I mean, I think they try to sometimes get transverse and stuff like that, but most of the time it's like just sagittal dominant and that's it. But yeah, I think if you could come up with like for every major, especially major, if not maybe the minor joints in the body, like a some kind of like endurance and then also like max strength. And then even maybe something like some type of like coordination. Cause I don't know, do you consider throwing like do you consider that to be more coordination or do you consider that to be more like of a max strength? What would you
I would
say?
say it's a combination of like speed, strength, or speed, depending on what kind of throwing. And well, I guess it depends too, because like shooting a basketball is almost all finesse, right? Almost
Yeah.
all skill,
Yeah.
but not a lot of power. Or,
I cannot
uh, cannot shoot.
I'm
You got
so
a broke
short
jump
that
shot.
it's like I mean,
But
I
like a
can, but I
baseball
have to be
pitch is
close though.
different.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. True.
Yeah, so like I would say probably the best test would be if like you just had people perform across every sport that exists, including like the marathon ones. And it's like obviously like the running back's not going to do very well in the marathon run, but like the power lifter's going to do horrible at the
Yeah.
marathon run. So like who across all athletic pursuits, who's going to win? And that would probably be the pinnacle of athleticism
And you
in
say
my
that's the
eyes.
running back?
I think it would be like a running back or a three in football,
Okay.
or sorry, in
Okay.
basketball,
Okay.
like a LeBron James kind of um, not huge, but like shifty, powerful, strong, and moves very well. Like to me, if I was going to define athleticism to one thing, it would be a great mover, which I know is like a really hard thing to define. And I hate that I'm going to say this because I would yell at myself for saying it. But like you know it when you see it,
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of thing,
yeah.
where it's like that guy, like that was clean. Like,
Yeah.
I've been doing Muay Thai, and my friend and I joined together, and you watch us throw these punches, and you're like, we have so much work to do. And you watch like the goes, and it's like how do I do that? I'm just trying to like watch him do it for the thousandth time. Like, why do we not look the same? It's
Yeah.
like I'm doing the same things, and you can just see that like cleanness where it's just like this flows
Yeah,
very
yeah.
smoothly.
It's the same thing with Harrison with karate. Like obviously he's very young, like just getting into it, but you watch kind of them practice and like they're trying really hard and stuff, but then you like watch the people in the Olympics or like actual karate competitions and stuff. And it's just night and day difference. Like so,
Yeah.
yeah, just so precise and accurate and so much force. But it's like it looks like they're barely doing anything. How did that create so much force? Like, yeah, just yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Does it ever look effortless when Harrison's doing it?
Yeah, when he definitely gets into like a flow state when they're doing the point fighting. And he really likes the kata too. The kata is kind of like this like choreographed. I- It's not really. I mean, maybe you would consider it a dance in a way, but it's like this choreographed like movement thing that you do individually. And it's yeah, just different movements that you kind of flow between. He really likes that one, and I think he does pretty well with it. His last competition, he got a gold medal for it, so I think it was
No.
pretty good. Um, and then he I would say he likes knockdown, which is basically like you just go and fight. Um, so he's very good at kicking. It's so funny though because he loves to kick instead of like kick punch or even like punch, punch kick or whatever. And it reminds me of me when I was younger because when I used to play soccer when I was younger, I would slide tackle all the time. Like until my coaches were like, Kathleen, stay on your feet. Like you don't have to always slide tackle.
That's
And
hilarious because my coach had a very similar talk to me in basketball. I was like, "You gotta stop diving after balls. Like, you stay on your feet, kid."
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's funny to me that he, like, always goes to the kick. Like, yes, the kicks do get more points and stuff, so it is good to, like, be really good at kicking. But it's also like but you also gotta mix it up so that they're not just constantly blocking kicks and they know what's coming and stuff. It's like, "Okay, kick, now punch," you know? So, yeah, so it's interesting to watch, but it is also very interesting too because he's pretty tall and he, like, grows fairly quickly. Like, he's up to okay, obviously, I'm not very tall, but he's, like, up to here on me now. Um, and you can tell, like, when he has a growth spurt, like, you can tell that his body has to, like and his, like, mind, proprioception, etcetera, has to, like, reintegrate movement with his, like, new structure. So that's really always interesting to watch as well. Um, so, yeah, I think child development is just truly
So
amazing.
fascinating.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting too because I've thought about that a lot because they're growing at such a rapid rate that their brain essentially never catches up. Like, because if he just stopped growing, he would probably, and because even when they stopped growing, like when I turned, I don't know, 16, I pretty much stopped growing, grew like a few more inches over a few years, but not drastic.
yeah,
But then you start packing on muscle mass as a
yeah,
guy and a little bit earlier. So then it's like your frame is still changing. And to me, it's interesting because the few sports that kids seem to excel at are snowboarding and skiing, which I don't exactly understand why, and things like gymnastics, which obviously like they aren't great. But if you put a kid in gymnastics, they compared to an adult, they will accelerate much faster. Part of it's like in snowboarding, part of it's because of lack of fear, and
yeah,
they like are they're like sponges, and they just get up and are never in pain.
yeah.
But and maybe it's just because of lack of mass too, because like this girl was like she called me dumb essentially in gymnastics because she's like I was like I don't know where my knees are in space when I'm trying to jump, and she's like yeah, some people are just body awareness dumb. I was like, dude, you are 4 foot 11. My leg is like weighs more than you. Like, come talk to me. When you are like a gain a foot and 100 pounds.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do wonder like why do I saw Chris Hemsworth's kids snowboarding, and I was like, gosh darn it, these kids are so much better than me. They're like 6 and 7. I'm like, how is that possible?
Yeah. Yeah, I just think their ability to, like, motor learn and stuff is just so good that, but that's, like, an argument for why it's important to, like, diverse across and, like, not just have them do one thing or, like, one movement, one side, all of that stuff, but, yeah, I wonder I was thinking when we were talking about the athletic endeavors, like, is there a test that shorter people would be, like, better at that tall people, like, wouldn't be able to do and vice versa? Because like, technically, like, I guess would Dr. Davidson say like I'm more grounded because I'm closer to the ground than you are, but then at the same time, my width is not as wide as you are because your bone structure is bigger than mine, and then like my muscle mass is proportional to my like size. So you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like I always wonder because like people will always say like oh, tall people are such at a disadvantage when it comes to doing like push-ups and stuff, where like short people, like they have the advantage of it. Or like even with the bench press, let's say like people that have long arms, like they're disadvantaged because a lot of that is probably more tricep dominant than like pec dominant. And so better bench pressers will have like, slightly shorter arms and stuff like that. That part of that is also too, you're just like not having to move the weight as far. Um, But yeah, I always wonder about like comparing across height. So not only comparing across like athletic domain, obviously comparing men and women, but then also comparing like across height. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Well, I always say that with muscle mass, like people that are shorter tend to obviously put it on faster.
Yeah.
Not put muscle on faster, but they
They
appear
look
bigger
it.
faster.
Yeah.
Yeah. But all of the strongest men are tall,
Yeah. That is
right?
true.
So it's like I have a much higher capacity to put on muscle, even though it's been a pain in the ass to put on as much muscle as possible to not look like a lanky surfer bro, which I'm also okay with, but at this point. But so you have like two ends of the stick where it's like it's you won't look as muscular as fast, but you have a higher potential for muscle. So I think that is interesting, and I do think you'd probably say like, yeah, you are more grounded. But if you were at my width and 100 pounds heavier, you'd probably be even more grounded. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Sure. But go
yeah,
ahead.
I do think like kind of wrap this all up. It in terms of the longevity argument as far as movement, work on your tissue capacity. So endurance, your heart, and putting on as much muscle, both are very slow things. But then choose at least one activity, and maybe it's seasonally, maybe it's annually, maybe whatever it is that you're like, I'm going to do this in retirement, and don't stop doing that. Now,
Yeah.
hopefully, it's not knitting. It can also be knitting, but like play a sport, something that requires balance. Gymnastics. I mean, that's kind of a tough one for a lot of adults, but snowboarding. I think that's why we see a lot of the extreme sports are being deemed better. It's because they are constantly challenging your brain, which is essentially what balance kind of is, at least to my understanding.
Yeah. I would say the big caveat there is if you are seasonal, don't we see this all the time where people will be like, I'm gonna jump right back into my 4 day a week pickleball or whatever when it comes time for it, when I haven't been like doing anything all season, and then they wonder why they're like crushed or they get injured or whatever. It's like make sure you either keep doing it or you like gradually build yourself back up again. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's the always big thing there. Work on your capacity basically.
Yeah. And when I meant seasonal, I meant like maybe go from like mountain biking into like snowboarding or something. So like the capacity should kind of be up there, or like tennis to, I don't know, baseball. Obviously, it might be different. You might be kind of sluggish the first few weeks, but
Yeah.
do something like once a week, once every other week, just so you don't get to like 65. You're like, I'm retired. I have all this free time and I can't do anything because I've lost all of my capacity.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That sounds like a great way to end this.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Thanks, Kathleen. Appreciate you for taking time. Till next time, guys. Be good.